Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. Phil, thank you so much for including us in this excellent presentation. So my name is Sophie Plitt, and I'm here representing my organization, the Natural Areas Conservancy, which is a public-private partner of the New York City Parks Department, really focused on managing and restoring the 10,000 acres of publicly accessible forests and wetlands in New York City. And just a little bit about me, an intro. I manage our organization's national partnerships and our Forests and Cities program, which I'll be introducing you to today. And my background is in urban and community forestry. I have a master's degree from the Stockholm Resilience Center in Stockholm, Sweden. And I'm particularly interested in really understanding how knowledge is shared between practitioner communities, scientific communities, and stewards when it comes to the urban forest. So Rich gave a really good introduction to what we're referring to when we talk about urban forested natural areas. And here in New York City, we were several years back working on developing a long-term 25-year plan for how to manage natural areas forests in New York City. And as we were developing this plan, we were looking around and trying to get inspiration from the way other cities are managing their urban woodlands, and found that it was actually really difficult to find information on how this was happening across the US. And so this really inspired my colleagues to find out more about how cities across the US are managing their forested natural areas and what common challenges they might be facing. So back in 2019, we conducted a survey of over 108 organizations across 92 cities to learn about their forested natural areas programming. And as you might imagine, we found that these organizations are facing some really common challenges. And some of these came up, for example, in Alex's presentation, and also I saw in some of the comments in the chat. So folks who are managing forested natural areas in cities generally have very limited funding or staff. Like as Alex said, for example, Springfield has no money devoted to municipal management of forested natural areas. Often there's limited data in terms of understanding where these forest patches are and what condition they are in, and low awareness of the natural areas in general. And on the ecological side, again, a lot of this came up in Max, Rich, and Alex's talks, but really challenged by invasive species, negative human use, and of course, climate change stressors. So what we're learning is one of the most common misconceptions about these forested natural areas is that, a lot of the general public and decision makers think because they're forests and natural ecosystems that they're self-sustaining. But the reality is that due to the urban context, fragmentation, threats of development, misuse, and invasive species, these precious forests that provide all of these really important benefits to urban residents need a lot of protection and management in order to thrive and provide benefits. Unfortunately, when we look at how much funding and investment is being made into protecting and managing these forests, we find a trend across US cities. And on average, only 4% of municipal budgets that are devoted to parkland, of that total parkland budget, only 4% is being allocated to natural areas, despite the fact that often these natural areas make up a majority of parkland and offer outsized ecosystem services. So having all of this knowledge, the Natural Areas Conservancy decided to launch a network of practitioners who are really leading in the field of protecting and managing forested natural areas. So in 2019, we launched the network, and we're now in our 4th year and have 19 cities represented in our network who represent over 270,000 acres of forested natural areas. And I'll just mention that this map represents 17 cities, and we're so thrilled to have 2 new cities have just joined our network this year, Boston, Massachusetts, and Portland, Oregon. And I saw some folks from those teams on the call, so thanks for joining. So as a network, we really work to nurture and grow a national network of experts to advance urban forest science and practice by collectively asking questions about forested natural areas as a national network, and to really leverage our voice as a network to raise awareness and advocate for increased resources and support, both at the national level and on the ground locally in our network cities. We're thrilled to highlight some of the recent publications and accomplishments of our network. We've hosted 3 annual workshops where we convene our network together and really work to share ideas and best practices. We've published over 32 case studies in the journal Cities and the Environment, and I'll share a link soon where you can access those, that really highlight how cities are approaching some of the challenges to managing these forested natural areas. I'll highlight some of the studies that we've done as a network to really think about climate change and forest and natural areas benefits. So we've really been thinking about what some of the impacts to climate change have been on forested natural areas to this in this session, but also forested natural areas are a nature-based solution to climate change. So for example, we did some analysis and looked at how forested natural areas store and sequester carbon, and compared that to, for example, street trees. So this is some of the data from that study in New York City, but it was also replicated across 5 other cities in our network. And we found that forested natural areas or forest patches are storing and sequestering 4 times more carbon than all of the street trees combined. And as you might imagine, that has a lot to do with the density of trees and also soil and understory growth. So these are really valuable carbon sinks in our urban areas. Another study that we looked at in our forested natural areas network is how forested natural areas provide cooling benefits. And we looked at land cover types and compared sort of the land surface temperature data, and we also deployed temperature sensors to look at air temperature data and comparing forested natural areas and other land use types. And, you know, vegetation makes land surface cooler. So this is some of the data results that we had from Minneapolis, St. Paul, where we found that forested natural areas are nearly 7 degrees cooler than paved surfaces. And this was back in the summer of 2021. And I think there's a link in the chat there where you can check out the full Cooling Cities study that shares the results of the work we did across 12 US cities to look at the cooling benefits of forested natural areas. And one of the reasons that we really highlight the benefits of forested natural areas and collect this data is to make the case that without management, these natural area benefits will be lost. So without restoring and protecting our ecosystems, we lose those cooling and carbon storage benefits. So just to quickly move on and highlight a few tools and resources that you can access. We worked very closely with Rich and Max and their Urban Silviculture Network to create something called the Urban Silviculture Guide. And this really highlights the great work that happens in more rural areas and silvicultural practices that are used for rural forests, and thinks about how they can be applied in cities, including step-by-step instructions, a silviculture checklist, some prescription templates, and case studies. And the key takeaways of the Urban Silviculture Guide is that, you know, by investing in forests, you strengthen communities. We also strengthen partnerships locally, regionally, and nationally through networks like our own, promoting forests as a nature-based climate solution, and also improving the availability of data to really drive good decision-making when it comes to managing forests. And so just to give a quick example, and also one that addresses a question that I saw pop up in the chat, one of the case studies in the Silviculture Guide highlights how cities like St. Louis are doing prescribed burns in urban forest patches paired with thinning to help restore forest composition from a more shade tolerant and moisture loving structure to a more open oak structure that really helps the oak hickory woodlands thrive. And finally, I just want to highlight our online Forests and Cities resource library, which is a free online tool that shares the published case studies and other really useful protocols and approaches that forest and natural areas practitioners are using across the US. So here you can see the different categories and the different themes that some of our resources are sorted by on the website. And I really encourage you to check it out. And just to keep with our theme, you can find some tools there. For example, New York City's first tool, which is a tool for identifying species that are appropriate to a current habitat and what the projected tree composition could be to be more resilient in future climate scenarios. And I'll also highlight, you can find on the resource library a case study using data to understand how forests are vulnerable to climate change in Seattle that was authored by our friends at the Green Seattle Partnership. So I hope you check out this really great free resource online and learn more about our Forests and Cities Network. And here's my email if you have any further questions. Thank you.
And good morning to all out there. I am Barbara Eisman.